Hi there, this is Alan with Sound Training Group. I'm here with Dan, my partner, and we're going to talk about current events and how important it is to public safety, police, fire, EMS, and security, and how we do our jobs. If any of you have followed us on Facebook or Twitter, you'll know that we send out a lot of news articles. We send articles on use of force, articles on fires, articles on police incidents. On Twitter, we send out a lot of public interest stuff relating to the uniformed services. And we're going to talk a little bit about why you should be following current events and that it's almost a responsibility to keep abreast of what's going on in your region, in your state, even nationally and internationally within your chosen profession.
Well, today, since we have the internet widely available to almost everybody on the planet, um, it's a good idea to get familiar with the news media with relations to performing your job and your responsibilities. Most security officers, when they get hired, do their jobs and don't realize what news sources are out there available to them to do their jobs. And today we're going to talk about why we go to great lengths to get these stories out to not only public safety but society in general. We want to make sure security officers understand that they're not alone in their perceptions and what they do and the frustrations out there. Um, Law enforcement, and in some cases fire and EMS, they all follow what goes on around the country and around the world. And we, as security professionals, should be doing the same thing.
One of the things you're going to notice is these stories are all going to talk about issues that are important to you. When you take your initial training for those states that have training, and maybe even more important for those states that don't require training, but your initial training is the bare minimum. It's exactly what you need to get started in any profession. But you need to keep going in training. And reading news stories and current events can be an informal training method. Now there are some places that do articles with a little quiz at the end that makes it a formal training, but today what we're mostly talking about is the informal training of reading something. One of the first headlines that I read today was one that says Whole Foods fires security guard who allegedly beat up a shopper. Now this came from Private Officer International, who's one of the better news sites that we follow. And just looking at the headline, without even getting into the meat of the article here, fires a security guard who allegedly beat up a shopper. Well, when we took the basic class, we learned about use of force, but a little bit, not as much as some use of force classes will cover. And we learned that a lot of places have a very strict hands-off policy. Problem is, that's not usually your choice. We're going to learn more about that when we read about another article later on. But here, the key thing here is fires the security guard. This this member of our security force lost a job. And notice that it says allegedly beat up shopper. That tells me the case isn't done yet. This tells me that the investigation may not even be done yet. Somebody just said this guy beat me up, and the employer's response was, "You're fired." Well, this is something to think about now before you get involved in a use of force incident. Make sure you're going to do it right. I mean, maybe you're not even going to get involved in a use of force incident after reading this, but if you do, make sure you have witnesses, make sure you have a partner with you, make sure you have backup. These are the things we need to look at. Uh, Another one here is a security guard shoots a suspect at a Fort Lauderdale party. Well, that came from security officer headquarters, one of the other uh, people or groups that we follow on Twitter. When you take the classes required to be an armed guard, it will cover use of force, it will cover shoot, don't shoot decisions. Really, when you take any firearm safety course, you should be learning about these things. But one of the things is, as you start reading these articles, and I don't know this Fort Lauderdale case very well myself yet. I need to read more about it, but one of the things you're going to find is you're going to start seeing things that jump out at you as bad shoots. You're going to see things that look like this. Say, I'm not sure I would have shot in that situation. Well, if you're working as an armed security officer, you need to be reading these and looking at these things and seeing whether there's criminal charges filed against the officer or whether there's not. Because this is telling you almost really, this is helping you build an internal guidebook in your head about when to shoot and when not to shoot.
So you're probably wondering why we spend a lot of time posting articles and information from a lot of sources out there. And as Alan said, the number one thing that we believe is the training aspect. Every article that we post, whether it be on Facebook or LinkedIn, Twitter, whether we send them through emails, we're trying to convey something. And it's not something article specific, but a training aspect that a security officer will read this and say, you know, that could happen to me, or that incident could happen at my site. And so the number one reason why we do it is the training aspect. Another thing is the trends. Private security is an evolving institution, if you will. It's constantly growing, and you probably heard this before. Private security outnumbers public law enforcement 3-1. And there's a lot of trends out there. Things are changing all the time, and we need to know what's going on. Statistics. How many security officers are hurt or injured, killed in the line of duty, arrested for not doing their jobs correctly? These are things we should know. The laws that are out there. Each state has their own set of laws. You have to understand the laws that in the state that you live in. However, state laws sometimes set precedent for other laws in other states. The courts set precedents as far as case law. We try to put those kind of articles out so you understand that things don't always remain the same. There's no status quo. We're moving at a rapid pace. You know, a lot of times law enforcement are out there, and whether good or bad, they're out in public view, and we hear so much about them, about, you know, some of them are being arrested, some of them are heroes, and they're doing rescues, and, you know, and we're in the same position. We're uniformed as well. We're out in the public eye as well, and we need to know the laws and how they apply to us. Worldwide, security personnel are doing things that we're not doing here. And we're always saying that we want to change the industry, change the profession. Well, maybe it's time we look at what other countries are doing as far as enforcing private security rules and regulations. We can't always stick to what we know and that's it. We have to keep our minds open.
Now, I want to switch tones just a little bit. The next article I'm going to talk about actually comes from a website called firehouse.com. For those of you old enough to remember when Dennis Smith started Firehouse Magazine back in the 70s, I was just a kid then, but my dad and my brother subscribed to it when they were firefighters. This rapidly became one of the premier firefighter news sources and news magazines, but it also dealt with articles for the family and even had a recipe section that became a published cookbook. But when we talk about the news articles, they have a very good news site. Again, it's fire service oriented, and we post this for two reasons. One, here at Sound Training Group, we do offer classes that are relevant to the fire service, but also there's not cross training, but cross operational concerns. So the article I'm going to talk about here is separate fires force evacuations at a Georgia hotel. This is one hotel that had two fires at the same time in two different rooms. Well, a lot of these hotels hire security. So obviously The two separate fires from the firefighting standpoint is, what do you do when you're at a building and there's two different fires that aren't related? Do you have enough manpower to handle it? Do you need extra units? Where are your extra units coming from? How are you going to keep people safe, whether you're evacuating the hotel or sheltering in place? But now, put this in the security standpoint. You're the one lone security officer on duty at the hotel, and you've got two major incidents going on. What do you do? How do you divide yourself, if it's possible? How do you handle both? What resources do you need? What are you calling? How are you interacting with the firefighters that are getting there? How are you interacting with the police officers that are getting there? So understanding that you could possibly be at a site with two major incidents. So this story kind of refreshes the mind on that. And again, it's part of thinking, what would I do if I were the guy there? The next one I'm going to talk about is one that's really more of a management theme, but it's something that hits home to us here at Sound Training as well as it should to most security companies, because we're all increasing our social media presence. And, as we are on Twitter and Facebook, as you have your own website, you have to start thinking about what's going to happen when you publish a story. The news media deals with this all the time. In public safety, we're just beginning to learn about this, but here's a headline: Man sues police chief after chief's tweet names him personal interest in a rape case. Basically, a police chief puts a tweet out that says, so-and-so is a suspect in a rape case, a person of interest, somebody we're looking at, we think he might have done this. Well, this is one of the worst charges you can be charged with, because, frankly, even if you're found not to be the suspect, everybody remembers you're the guy the police looked at in the rape. And that's where this is going to go. Because of a social media post, the chief is being sued. I'm sure the department is being sued. The city government is being sued. This is what happens with this. And these are why you need to start thinking about these things. Everything you do has a potential legal implication.
So the reason, again, why we post these articles, and I enjoy posting them, not so much for getting the message out, but more for, again, the training. Every article should have the person reading the article thinking about not only what they're reading specifically to that situation, but putting yourself in that situation. You have an incident that occurs at a site, and you're reading about a security officer that was injured, and we're not trying to quarterback what the security officer could have done or not done, but it should get you thinking about what you would do in that situation. Are you mentally prepared? Do you know what to do? Do you know how to get your back up? These articles show a way of getting your mental cognitive status higher. Reading these articles should always have you asking why. Why did this person do that? Why didn't he do that? And putting yourself there. Aside from the regular training that you might get, reading information, even newspapers, should get you thinking about certain situations. Listening to the news. We sit there and we watch the news on a nightly basis, whether you do it online or on TV, and we listen to the news and we let it go. Some of those situations apply to us, and not only on the job, but even personally. And in a future episode, we're going to talk about situational awareness, but those are things you have to think about when you read these articles. How would I respond? What would I do? Am I prepared? Maybe I should go back and tell my superiors, I'm concerned about this. How can we work this out?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Bringing concerns to the company, saying, hey, I was just reading this article about something and I think I know a way that we could maybe do something better. You probably shouldn't be approaching it with your supervisors, hey, we're doing something wrong and let me fix the company, because I tell you what, that's the quickest way to get branded a troublemaker, even if you're dead on right on the topic. But if you come up and say, hey, I was just reading this article about something, and I think this could happen here, and, here's maybe a way we could talk about it. I'd like to sit down and talk with it. A lot of the supervisors, at least the good ones, are going to be, yeah, okay, let's sit down and talk about this. Let's hear your thoughts about it. Uh, in the last episode, I mentioned the story of the father who had his son at the mall, and he had a very positive view towards mall security. Well, one of the articles that I sent out a tweet of, I retweeted from the National Police Wives Association, an article on teaching kids that we're not all bad and that we're here to protect them. There's something to be said because a lot of people mix up uniforms. They really see the uniform. They don't know whether you're a police officer or a security officer. They don't know if you're a firefighter or a paramedic. They really don't know. You're just somebody who's there in uniform. And there's good and bad about that. To most people, you're there to help. But there is a growing anti-police sentiment in this country, and that is going to extend to security, to firefighters. There's already been talks that the military shouldn't wear their uniforms in public. I hope we never get to the day when the United States military can't wear the street on Main Street, USA. But these are things we have to think about. If you're coming and going from work in your uniform, do you bring a different jacket to cover up that doesn't look like that? You have to start thinking about these things. And and that was a good article from the National Police Wives Association. These are people that are married to police officers and saying, hey, this is something that affects me and my family. I'm going to skip ahead one on this and talk briefly about an incident that happened at an Arby's. The headline from today was Arby's apologizes for treatment of officer at Florida restaurant. What happened is a police officer came in, went to the drive-thru, ordered their food, and when they got there, was told, oh, I'm not going to serve you, you're a police officer. Long and short of it, there was a complaint to the manager. The manager said the clerk had every right to not serve police officers. The police officer finally did get the food, but then wouldn't eat it because there was obviously a safety and health concern with food made by somebody who hates you. In the apology, the manager's been fired, and the clerk who refused service has been suspended. There were, over the past few days, national police sites calling for a national boycott of Arby's. I'm not going to get into the political ramifications of whether we should or should not boycott businesses, but I used to work a site that was about a block from the local Taco Bell, and it wasn't uncommon when I got off work to stop at Taco Bell and get dinner. Well, interesting thing is that most of the time when I'd walk into the security uniform, despite the big patch on the back of my shirt that said security, I don't know whether they were really pro-security or whether they thought I was law enforcement, but I would say about 2/3 of the time I got a discount. The interesting thing was the discount was rung up differently every time. Sometimes I was getting the senior citizen discount, sometimes I was getting some other discount, or there was a promotional rate. Basically, they, without saying a word to me, I'd see on the register that they were trying to do something nice, and I'd always say thank you if I noticed it, and go on. I mean, ethically, you should never ask for that discount, but if somebody gives it, at least say thank you. But now start the other way. If I walked into that Florida Arby's in a security uniform that looks enough like a law enforcement uniform, am I going to have a safety concern? Is this something to think about? So understanding and reading all these articles really tells us about what's going on in the country. Even though I'm nowhere near Florida, and the chances of me walking into that restaurant, slim to none. But we have to start thinking about these things.
It's funny, even going back 20 years ago or so, I'm in the business myself about 25 years, and the only way we got news was from the paper and the TV. And if I'm working, I can't watch TV. And we had a paper, but that was already yesterday's news. Today, we have the internet. And for many of you out there, especially with Twitter accounts, everything's real time or very close to real time. And there's nothing out there that's not happening that you don't know within seconds around the world. And we need to use these social media and news outlets as our source of information. There's lots of information out there. A lot of it applies to us doing our jobs. We, as security officers, have a responsibility to be informed. And not just one or two articles about reading something, but constantly being informed. It's just like training. We always preach continual training. but we also preach being continually informed. You have to know what's going on around the world in your country, your state, your town, your neighborhood. You need to know what's going on and staying abreast of all the articles that we post, that other sources post, will get you to a better level of understanding about your surroundings, what the trends are, and how that affects your job.
You know, it definitely is something you need to keep up on. I'm going to look at one here very briefly. I'm mentioning it simply because it happened in Stamford, Connecticut, the next town over to where we were, and the town where I work in. And I was working as a dispatcher the day this came in. So, Stamford woman jailed on robbery charge after grappling with Lord and Taylor security. Well, guess what? Here's another time where the choice to go hands-on may not be yours. This article starts with the woman was arrested after pushing past a loss prevention agent and wrestling on the ground with him. Well, again, this is not the loss prevention agent's choice to go hands-on, but that's what it ended up with. It also turned a larceny of shoplifting into a robbery because there was physical harm or a threat to physical harm. So this is, again, a training topic to look at. This woman was charged with robbery because of what occurred during what would have normally been a larceny. So there's definitely something to be learned for that. The next one I'm going to cover is one that actually led to a little bit of back and forth between myself on the Twitter feed and some stuff in a good way, a good discussion, and that's a story out of Ohio. I got it from Security Update, one of the Twitter feeds we follow. Ohio Building Board cautions schools about barricade devices. And there's a lot of companies out there selling devices which are basically fancy door chocks that will keep a door closed. The theory is you keep the kids in the classroom during the school shooting and you jam this thing under the door and the bad guy can't get in. The problem is the good guys can't get in either. And you can't get out unless you remember to remove this thing from the door before opening it. It's going to make it impossible to open the door. Sometimes the best intentions make something more dangerous, and we have to start thinking, is it a good idea to have a schoolroom that you can't get out of, or that the SWAT team can't get into to check on you, that rescuers can't get into? And I went back and forth between Security Update and actually one of the other people that I follow on Twitter through our company, a gentleman who goes by the name of the Security Sensei, and he does a lot of good information on home invasions, burglaries, and how to prevent those. And we're both of the opinion that the best intentions sometimes don't work out so well. In Connecticut, after the Sandy Hook shooting, we rushed through a school security law, and it requires essentially bulletproof glass in elementary schools. It's a glass that also can't be beaten through with, say, an axe or a Halligan or a saw that the fire department might use. So essentially it turns your school into a big bulletproof oven. Now you have to start thinking during your threat assessment, statistically, what do we have more of, school shootings or school fires? Is our effort to make the school bulletproof going to hurt people in a fire? I don't know the answer to that, but these are things we have to think about. And now you have to think about, if you're school security and there's a fire and the window is not a viable evacuation route, how are you getting those kids out? So we have to start thinking about all of these things and how they play into what we do.
And that's a good point. Security officers on the frontline security officers, we have to take responsibility. And we don't say that lightly. And what we mean by that is not only reading the articles, but being informed within your professional circles, whether it be through other colleagues, your superiors, associations. We have to take a personal responsibility. We're always saying, or at least I hear all the time, that we need to make changes and we need to make upgrades. And in theory, it sounds terrific. The only problem is we don't take responsibility in trying to implement something from a personal standpoint. And these articles serve well. If you were to approach your superiors with a number of related articles to what your situation is, you can present something and say, boss, I read these couple of articles that I printed here. We could make a change here to make this site a lot safer or more service friendly, whatever the case may be. So articles that we post, that other sources post, is a good evidence based information system for you, not only for your personal protection and the protection of others, but as something that you can present to your company or your superiors to make improvements to your site, to your security program, the employees, visitors, any number of applications. But we have to be willing to take that first step.
And we do have to be ready to take the first step, but we shouldn't take the first step that fast, and that's why I'm going to bring up the last article I'm going to talk about. It was a great one from EMS1.com, which is an emergency medical services website, but you could easily cross out EMS and put fire, police, or security in this article. It's called Never Move Faster Than Your Ability to Make Good Decisions. Now, for those of you that have taken our basic security course for Connecticut, or those of you that are thinking about taking it, we really drill into you officer safety, scene size up, situational awareness, fighting complacency, and knowing what you're going before you walk into the scene, knowing whether it's safe. And this was an article with a senior paramedic training a newer paramedic who asked him, why don't we run into the building to go save people? And he finally said, never move faster than your ability to make good decisions. Don't run into the building if you're running faster than you can survey the scene and know what's going on. And that's what this is all about, is staying safe. All the training we do is going to be about staying safe. The number one concern in all emergency services, and it's one that we sadly don't hear enough of in private security, but the public sector will tell you that it's all about everybody goes home. And that is truly what it's all about. It's about everybody going home. I think what we need to look at here is safety. And all these articles we talked about have a safety component, they have a training component, they have a knowledge component. And what we really need to be doing is understanding that this informal training, I mean, some of the best training I've ever done has been with a bunch of guys sitting around the dinner table talking about, hey, did you hear about that big fire in the next town? Well, do we have any buildings like that? Yeah, we do. We got that building over there on the west side. It's like that. Well, you start thinking about these things. Well, think about it in a security standpoint. If I'm working in a mall in Connecticut and I read about an incident that happened in a mall in Georgia, immediately I'm thinking, what does that mall have in common with us? Is it in the same type of location? Is it in a rural area or an urban area? What's the population like? Demographically, what are the crime levels like in that area? What's the surrounding area like? You have to start thinking, do we have the same problems? Do we have the potential for the same problems? And, some of these are things that could happen anywhere. Some of these are things that are specific to the neighborhood. But even if it's not specific to the neighborhood, even if your mall isn't in a similar neighborhood, do you have a similar neighborhood in the area? Does your customer base come from the same area? And this could be anything from financial to racial to cultural. There's all sorts of factors that boil into economics, and really there's no one easy answer, but you have to start looking and saying, could this happen here? And that's why we post these articles, to try and help you get the idea of what could happen.
Folks, basically it's all about training. And I know we use that word constantly, and you have to be able to use these to your advantage, this information. For those of you, and I'm sure many of you out there have an iPhone or an Android laptop or similar device, if you're fortunate enough to have those items and you're working, or whether you're not working, but let's say you're on the job and your company permits you to be on the computer with internet access. Some of you might be downloading music or other things, but take the time in your downtime to read some of these articles. you'd be surprised the information that's out there. And you know what? It doesn't cost you anything. Maybe a few minutes of your time. And I really believe those few minutes could really save your life or someone else's life or help you personally in your career and in your company. It's just a little bit of time and you gain the greater knowledge for public safety.
Definitely. That's it for this episode. I'd like to thank you for listening. Uh, those of you that want to go back to our first episode, which is a little bit about us and our company, why we do what we do, that's great. You can listen to that. It'll be on our YouTube site, and there'll be links on our Facebook and our LinkedIn and Twitter feeds. We'll be doing more of these episodes. Stay tuned to listen to more.
Have a good night, folks.